Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
In some cities, parking is a racket, particularly Philadelphia. I did a video not too long ago about the courtesy tows of Philadelphia, T-O-W, tow. And that is where occasionally the city of Philadelphia will close a street or be doing some work or something. And they'll just grab vehicles that are legally parked and tow them to other spots in the city and just dump them there. And then where they get dumped, they might get ticketed, they might get towed again, they might get impounded, they might wind up being auctioned off. And it's just a crazy situation, but the city is so large and the parking department is so messed up that it doesn't seem like they can fix it for some weird reason. And the weird reason is they're making money off it. But there's another version of this wackiness out of Philadelphia from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Rob pointed it out to me. William Bender wrote the story. But a car was ticketed and impounded by the Philadelphia Parking Authority after the sign was switched, and the PPA now admits a $475 error. But the sign was switched while the car was parked. So a woman parks her car legally and leaves. The city comes by and goes, oh, let's switch the signs. And now a $475 ticket. So her name is Liz Miner. And she thought her car had been stolen, but it was actually towed by the Philadelphia Parking Authority after they switched the signs after she had parked. The funny part is she actually took a photograph of her car before she walked away from it. And in fact, it's a habit she got into because when she first moved to the city, she got an expensive ticket. And she thought to herself, you know something, this might come in handy to photograph my car. And by the way, if you got a cell phone, it's real easy to do. Park your car, lock it, and take a picture. And she did that, and she thought someday this will come in handy. And it did. In early April, Miner, who works for a public accounting firm as an auditor, had parked in a legal spot within her permit zone at 8th and Lombard Streets. She checked on it each morning during her walk to work in Center City. She says that it was an expensive ticket she got earlier that taught her to become vigilant. She says, I was extremely aware of where I was parking. So her car was parked legally, it was there, and then when she returned from work Thursday afternoon, her Camry was gone. It had been ticketed at 1:35 p.m., then towed by the PPA because it was in a handicap spot. Now, it wasn't a handicap spot when she parked it. It became a handicap spot while her car was parked there. So she said it looked like there were brand new handicap parking signs, and she was like, what the heck? I didn't realize they could just switch the signs. They basically accused me of parking in a handicap spot that wasn't handicapped when I parked there. She said there was no advance notice. There was a work order wedged between the pole and the back of the sign that appeared to indicate that new signs had been freshly installed. So there was paperwork on the spot if you looked for it, but it was after the fact. So she paid the fee, which was $475, which was the cost of the ticket plus towing to get her car back from the PPA impound lot. Now, for the past 6 weeks, she's been trying to dispute the ticket and the towing, of course. She's gone on the PPA's website, but the ticket isn't there, and said there's almost nothing I can do. It's so hard to get in touch with them. And they do that on purpose, by the way. We'll get back to that. She said she would have preferred that her car be courtesy towed, which of course is what I was talking about earlier, where they take your vehicle, they tow it someplace else and just leave it there. And then it's up to you to go find it. It's a little game they play. For a courtesy tow, I probably would have had to pay less than $475, she said. But that process, which relies mostly on handwritten notes and fax machines, has been plagued by problems too, with frequent reports of cars being lost or even towed into other no parking zones, then ticketed, towed, or booted by the PPA. So it's such a mess that it almost looks like they're doing this on purpose. They say your car can't be parked here for a reason on a courtesy tow. So they tow it to a spot and they dump it where it is now illegally parked. The city comes by and goes, hey, car's illegally parked. And they slap a couple tickets on it, but you don't know where it is, so you can't find it. And so after a few tickets go on it, they go, boot it. Now tow it. And so it's just a quagmire, as we like to say. Drivers who had initially parked legally have spent days or weeks searching for their vehicles after they are relocated out of temporary no parking zones. Others have been pulled over months later in other states because they initially reported their vehicles stolen, which is what most people would do. But Philadelphia police apparently failed to update the stolen vehicle database when they were recovered because, of course, of those handwritten notes and fax machines don't make this real easy to take care of. Now, after the story was published, a senior PPA official contacted the man whose car was courtesy towed in the other story, and like I said, I did a video on that, and took care of his situation. And he says, I was pleasantly surprised they did that. The bigger issue remains. But a spokesperson for the PPA looked into Liz Miner's case at the Inquirer's request, and that's the woman who had the sign switched while her car was legally parked. Records confirmed that she had parked at 8th and Lombard before it was converted to a space for drivers with disabilities. O'Rourke, who's at the PPA, said the agency has submitted a request to have the money refunded. So after they looked at it, they're going to take care of it. So the person from the PPA says, the car was clearly parked there before the signs were installed because that was listed on the work order. So the person who did the work actually made a note, there's a car parked here right now, but we changed the sign. And the city came in and ticketed it and towed it anyways. The PPA will ask that the ticket be dismissed and all fines and towing fees be refunded. We apologize for any inconvenience. So the woman paid the $475 to get her car back, and you have to because otherwise you got no car. And while you're thinking about this, storage fees are racking up. So if it's $475 today, it's like $1,500 in a couple weeks. So you got to do that just to mitigate your own damages. But then you try to navigate the Byzantine architecture of the PPA, and you realize it shouldn't be this difficult. Why is it this difficult? And it's difficult for a reason. And I'm convinced that there are people in the system who look at it and go, we could make it easier, but if we do that, we'd make less money. They make more money because the system is a nightmare. And I recently had a conversation with a good friend of mine, and we were talking about parking tickets, and he got a parking ticket that he's convinced that he shouldn't have gotten. And it's a $25 fine. And he said, should I fight it? And I said, well, there's a whole calculus that goes into this cost-benefit analysis. What's your time worth? The amount of hassle. I did a video about a morning I spent in court fighting a parking ticket. I said it was the smallest thing I've ever gone to court over. I did that, number one, for just the principle of the thing. But also, it saved me a couple bucks. But it's primarily principle. So I told my friend, I said, look, I go $25. I go, what's your time worth? And he said to me, he goes, but it's wrong. I said, okay. I go, now here's the thing. In a cost-benefit analysis, it's not that you monetize principle, but there is a value to it. So if it will just grind you that you paid $25 that you shouldn't have paid, then yeah, there's a benefit to fighting it and seeing you to resolve it. Notice that in this case, in this article, it's a wonderful article of the Philadelphia Inquirer written by William Bender, that there are two examples he gives of people who got tickets they shouldn't have gotten. And they both had them resolved with a very kind spokesperson from the PPA who says, we apologize for any inconvenience. And those two people got theirs resolved, and all they had to do was pay all the money up front and then get a local newspaper to write a scathing article. Now, I've just pointed out to you there's two ways to do this. Go to court and fight it, or get a newspaper to write a scathing article. Now, if you're not an attorney, going to court and fighting it might seem daunting, and it is. In fact, it was a waste of time, too, and I'm an attorney. I mean, I'm just sitting there. When are they going to call my parking ticket case? But newspapers get phone calls all day long from people who say, I've got a story for you. I've got a story for you. So you've actually got to get in that scrum and get a reporter to notice you and go, yeah, there's a story here. So this is a great story, but I would love to know how many other stories William Bender gets pitched to him on a daily basis and how he chooses which ones he does. And so he does these two stories and he helps these two people out. But for every one of these people who get their story resolved because they got the scathing article from the newspaper, there's 999 others who got nowhere, who are still looking for their car. or who are getting pulled over in another state because their car was reported stolen by them back when they thought it was. And there's also people right now who can't get their car out of the impound lot because they can't afford it. And every single day, the charges are racking up bigger and bigger and bigger. That is happening. So the problem is the Byzantine architecture of the parking authority. And it's that way on purpose. There are consultants out there. There are business folk out there. There are MBAs out there. There are people who study how to get organizations to run efficiently. Someone could come in to the PPA and say, you guys are using paper and fax machines? We can straighten this thing out and have it running like a well-oiled machine in a couple weeks and get the whole thing straightened out. But they won't do that. And they won't do it for a reason. Because if they did that, and I'm talking about actually having proper notices sent out to people, timely notices sent out to people, a good system in place for people to object and actually make a case and try to argue these things, which, by the way, is required by law. You know, due process, right? You have the right to be notified of what's going on and an opportunity to be heard. And it's got to be a meaningful opportunity. So if they grab your car off the street and dump it someplace, like a poor kidnapping in a bad movie, did you get notification that your car was being grabbed or dumped? No. There's a problem there. It's a lack of due process. So the PPA in Philadelphia is actually operating on the fringe of the law, if not just outright unlawfully. But it's the government, it's city government, which sometimes is the worst run of all. And I'm sure they have other problems, you know. They probably have problems with other big departments there. But when story after story after story comes out of one city about their bad parking, you got to go, hey, they got problems. And by the way, last time I talked about Philadelphia, people said, Steve, what about Detroit? Detroit's got the same problem, okay? And the video I did about where I went into court and fought a ticket was Pontiac, Michigan. And Pontiac, although smaller, is the poster child for just crumbling infrastructure and crumbling administrative structure. So it happens in a lot of places. It sounds like Philadelphia's might be a special kind of problem, but they're by no means unique. But it is an amusing story, and it has a happy ending. But you can imagine the consternation felt by Liz Miner when she came back and found that her car was gone, and then realized, wait, sometime along the last few days, this spot became a handicap spot? Do they just evolve like that? So there you go. But Rob, thanks for sending it. From the Philadelphia Inquirer and William Bender. Car ticketed, impounded by Philadelphia Parking Authority after sign switcheroo. PPA admits $475 error. Questions or comments? Put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Real education starts when you realize that life is wild and you know nothing about it.